What's something that's happened to you that sounds fake, but unfortunately isn't? Years ago, I broke my right foot. After 6 weeks in a boot, I was leaving the orthopedist office, boot-free. Just me and my own 2 feet, raw, dogging the ground. I was so excited to drive home now that I was out of that damn boot. And then on the way to the car, I stepped off the curb, rolled my left ankle, and broke. Commoner, I did something similar. Stepped off the curb, rolled my ankle. Foot swelled up. Finally went to the ER. Have heart problems, so any stress can be bad news. Didn't break it. They could see that I still had scar from an injury back 20 years prior. Don't do it again or you very well could break it. So I left without the boot. Didn't give me the option as I was stepping off the curb. Guess what I did? You guessed it. Rolled the ankle, turned around and just made my way back to the room I had just minutes before. They were empty that night, surprisingly. They hadn't fully processed my discharge papers. They asked if everything was okay. I told them what happened. They gave me the boot after checking if I broke it. Story 2. My grandmother prevented the neighbor boy from kidnapping our next-door neighbor. Our house was the bus stop. I woke up sick that morning and didn't go to school. Grandma was the neighborhood grandma and kept an eye on the kids that were at the stop every morning. She was watching the girl at the corner. She was the only one riding that morning. Looked back and she was gone. He was dragging her across our backyard with. My grandma ran at him screaming and throwing rocks at him while I called the cops. She won Citizen of the Year in our city. Come out her? I did this and when I was 12. Me and a group of friends were walking home from school and we see out classmate being pulled towards an open van and we all went in wild attack mode and beat the crap out of the guy and kept our friend from being kidnapped. None of us told our parents until it happened another time and we realized that maybe there were kidnappers hanging around our school. Comante 2. This was at the pinnacle of the latchkey generation, when parents had to be reminded that they had kids. There was no at home to tell and parents wrongly believed their children were just small adult and should be left to handle very adult crap on our own because that builds strength and character. We had to learn about child predators from TV shows like Different Strokes. No one talked about that crap, like I didn't know at age 9 that an adult should not be showing me 18+ pictures at the playground, so I never told anyone. I hope that kids these days are being taught about that stuff and about consent, body autonomy, to listen to their instincts when an adult makes them feel creeped out because it is not going to stop abuse. But kids now have the words to tell someone about it. Don't talk about crap. Bottle up your emotions. If you talk about bad crap happening, it will. You will spoil a baby if you pick it up while it is crying. Make people learn from their mistakes through suffering. Such are the lessons passed down to our forebears from the silent generation, and was the model for parenting well into the late 90s/early 00s. And that is changing, and I think your kids would tell you about beating up a would GE kidnapper. Story 3. I was dragged out of a tent in my sleep by a pack of dingoes on Fraser Island in Australia. I woke up to a weird feeling at my feet and saw that they were chewing on my toes through the sleeping bag. One of them was standing on my hip stomach, staring me in the face. Now, I'm not a fighter, but I hit him such a punch on the side of the head, like a perfect right cross to his cute, lil face. He went flying sideways, which spooked all the others, about 4 or 5 of them, and with a few kicks from my bagged-up legs, they scuttled away. I went back into the tent to find my then GF still asleep and snoring away. The next morning, I went over to our tour guide fella, massive Aussie dude named Tony, and told him what happened, and he asked, "Did you see which one it was?" And funnily enough, I did. He had a yellow and blue tag in his ear. They're all tagged on the island, and I remembered because they're the Wicklow colors where I'm from. And Tony just said, yeah, that's scary. I ended up punching quite a bit of wildlife in my year there, but Australia definitely started it. Story 4. In 1986, my parents planned a trip to Disney in FL. A random man tried to kidnap my half-brother by snatching him and running. He was tackled, my brother was safely returned to us, and nothing happened to the guy as he disappeared into the crowd. Fast forward to 1989, in Ohio, at a pop-up circus in a field, I was given change to go get a popcorn. A man dressed as a clown approached me, and after several long minutes of small talk, grabbed me. Bystanders saw the ordeal, and a random man with exquisite sideburns chased down this man who had thrown me into his pickup truck and gunned it. Mr. Sideburns and another man were able to pull him from the vehicle and stop the truck as it rolled into a parking lot and hit several parked vehicles. I was fine other than some forehead SCs from hitting the dash. The clown was not a circus performer or associated with the circus. He was an opportunistic predator. I can't even say either of these events were the worst part of my childhood. Also, duck clowns. Story 5. Not me, but my uncle. He was in Jamaica when his wife, who was doing fitness classes, and the authorities drove him to an ATM and told him he's going to be suspect #1 if he doesn't pay them, and he'll never have his wife repatriated to the US. He complied and they took him back to the resort. Unbeknownst to him, T-Pain was also there and caught wind of the situation and worked magic with his connections to keep my uncle safe and bring my aunt home for a funeral, as well as providing his bodyguard protection to my uncle. To this day, almost 2 decades later, They will video chat on holidays like Easter to talk, and in my view, that man is a saint to our family. Anytime he's in town, they'll meet backstage before one of his concerts, and they'll have a big hug. One time, he met his family. I will never forget the kindness this man has shown over decades. It's insane. Story 6. I lived in a small, quiet town, and my house was in a cul-de-sac, so all the neighbors knew each other, and we all got along well. One night, when I was about 12 years old, I was babysitting my baby brothers. Twins. It was bedtime, so we were laying in my mom's bed watching a movie to wind down. Suddenly, they both start whining that they want chocolate milk. I was super annoyed because I just wanted them to go to sleep so I could be off the clock, so to speak. Just as we walked through the doorway and out of the bedroom, I heard what sounded like firecrackers going off in the bedroom we just left. I peeked my head back in the doorway and heard a couple more. It sounded like it was coming from the closet, which was about a foot away from me at this point. I called my mom and told her what happened and that I was scared. We didn't go back in the room until she got home. Once she was home, we discovered several bullet holes throughout the bedroom, in the walls, in the closet door, and one in the corner of the TV, so we called the cops. They figured out that our neighbor had been doing some target practice in his garage and drinking, and his garage wall faced our house. So the bullets entered my mom's bedroom through the wall, just a few inches above her bed, which had no headboard, right where our heads had been while we were lying there watching the movie. If those little butt heads hadn't bothered me for chocolate milk at that exact moment, things could have been very different. Story 7. In 2012, I lifeguarded at a beach in Delaware. I was talking with a lady who was drinking a glass of wine on the beach. While telling her she was not allowed to do that, Dave Grohl walked behind me. I am a massive fan and knew he would vacation at this beach, but never assumed I would run into him. In the moment of being absolutely starstruck, the lady goes, "Oh, you're a fan of Dave, I see." Barely able to talk, I said, "Yes, he is a reason I got into drumming." She then said, "Oh, he's my son. You should go say hi." I let her drink the wine, and I was able to talk to my music idol for a solid 20 minutes. One of the best days of my life. Story 8. I was hit in the head by a bowling ball on a trampoline. 911 hung up on my cousin because they thought it was a prank. Cousin's brother found it in the woods. Sat it on the springs to clean it off and take a look. I was getting up and going to walk home when older brother of cousin Swan dove onto the trampoline. Bowling ball bounced and hit me in the back of the head as I was standing up. Had enough force to flip me over. I could feel my arms touching the mat, but I visually saw them still in the air. Knocked me out for a bit. EMT blew my vein trying to get IV in. Stayed strapped to a backboard for over 6 HRS as they performed x-rays and tests. Pretty nasty concussion. Story 9. I got hit by lightning while driving my car down the interstate. Completely killed the computer system and totaled the car out. Commenter, this happened to me. My mom didn't believe me until they came up and saw the roof of the car where the lightning hit. My dad was able to get it going eventually, over 6 months, and a lot of replacement parts. But you couldn't run a code reader on it. It threw every single code there was. We nicknamed the car Frankenstein. Story 10. Not mine, but a friend's story. When she was about 5 or so, she was at CV's with her dad when someone robbed the store. While the robber is pointing a gun and yelling at everyone to get on the ground, her dad, being an Asian man born in Asia, says, "Happy Halloween," because he thought it was a costume. This happened in November. Story 11. I've randomly came across not one but 2 people attempting or about to attempt died. Didn't know either of them. Both at totally different locations. Both times I was just living my normal life, and then suddenly I'm trying to stop a died. Ambulance came and got the one. The other one, after a very long talk down, ended up taking off upon realizing I had dialed 911, so the operator could hear what was going on. Story 12. When I was in elementary school, we went on a class trip to one of those old colonial towns to see how life was back then for settlers. During lunch break, I went to the bathroom, and a man paid me to take pictures of me in the bathroom. I was really excited to get money. Next thing I knew, I was in a police car, scared out of my mind that I was in trouble. I kept apologizing to the cop while my mom tried to calm me down. I remember crying all night that my principal would hate me because I made the cops come. What an odd memory. Story 13. I was working and felt like I broke a rib. It went away, but I offhandedly mentioned it to my doctor. She was super concerned and ordered a bone scan. It was stage 4 cancer. Story 14. Slept with a boyfriend for over a year, unprotected, and found out he had HIV. Been tested for 20 years straight, and I'm still negative. Edit. Woke up to a huge reaction. Never expected this. I'm going to answer some things here. Yes, he knew and didn't tell me. His plan was to act like I gave it to him. I thought there was no way I didn't have it. So for several years, I was in the mindset that I had contracted it. When I was 18, I started getting tested twice a year and have been negative every test. I don't think I am Finnish or Nordic. I should check that out someday. There are so many horrible things that are in this thread. I'm surprised this was even seen. Thank you for concern, everyone. Story 15. My cousin beat my aunt, then put a towel over her face and sat down and ate dinner. My other cousin had a welfare check, and they found him watching TV with her body in the kitchen. Edit. This happened about 10 years ago in Florida. My cousin is mentally unstable due to a car accident that happens to him when he was in his teens and has been on medication his whole life, and I guess the older he got, the worse he got. He was in his late 40s when he killed my aunt. I guess they got into an argument, and he snapped and beat her, then cleaned up and put all the evidence in the attic, but left her lying on the kitchen floor with the towel over her face. He's been in a mental institution ever since. Story 16. I was riding my bike around my apartment building as a kid, ran into some bullies from school. Now as a kid, I had a problem with shutting up. I had no idea how, so I pissed them off. So I was riding my bike as fast as possible to get away from them. They were also on bikes, when I got something on the ground and went flying. A few things to note. 1, I was a tiny little girl, like 70 pounds tops. 2, I was poor, so my bike was used, a bit rusty, and most importantly, missing handlebar grips. 3, the combination of speed, my weight, and whatever I hit launched me more up than forward. So I hit something, the bike fell on its side, and then I fell on the bike. Felt like it knocked the wind out of me. And I knew it had to be bad because one of the bullied pedaled away as fast as possible. The other one helped me home in saying that this doesn't make us friends on the way. Left our bikes where they were. I didn't care. My midsection hurt where I landed. Got home and my mom turned to greet me and practically screamed that I was bleeding. I looked down and realized that I was bleeding a lot from my stomach and fainted. I woke up at the hospital later to find out that I had landed onto a bike handle, which has impaled me through my midsection about halfway through. Me missed my organs just barely and left me with a neat scar and a story no one believes until they see the scar. Story 17. My brother put a banana and loaded gun to my head. The cops came and found an airsoft gun with an orange tip and claimed that was the weapon, despite me denying it all night. I found the real gun a couple months later in a coat closet wrapped up in a scarf. Those cops sucked at their job. Story 18. I rescued my father from the Sinaloa cartel outside Guadalajara in 2007. He was there on business launching a broadcast satellite and had a major heart attack. Was taken to a small clinic and held for ransom by the cartel. Machine guns, private jets, pockets full of cash. Got him back, and he lived another 10 years to see his grandsons born. Story 19. I was almost killed by a bug. I was bitten by a flea or a tick, unsure of which. A couple weeks later, I passed out in a Walmart and woke up after emergency surgery with a hole bigger than my fist in my abdomen under my left ribs. Misses a man. I do not recommend. Story 20. When I was 10 years old, several people in my neighborhood were attacked by a deranged squirrel that was missing part of its tail. One day, my dad was at work, and my mom was running errands, so myself and my 2 other brothers, aged 14 and 7, were left home alone. I was in the kitchen and my 7-year-old brother was playing on the back porch. Suddenly, a squirrel that was missing the tip of its tail started attacking the kitchen window, about 10 feet from where my brother was playing. I ran outside to caution my younger brother, but it was too late. The squirrel bit him on the finger and was running up and down his arm while my brother screamed his head off. I grabbed this insane, bloodthirsty creature with my bare hands and chucked it into a tree. By now, my older brother had come to see what was going on. I told him what had happened. And because this took place in small-town Mississippi, he of course had full access to the family gun cabinet. He got a gun, went outside, and shot some random squirrel that was not missing the tip of its tail. I told everyone that it was not the same squirrel, but no one listened to me. The story of my brother's heroic actions went around town, and he was even written about in the town newspaper for saving the day. Absolutely no mention of me or my heroism at all. Story 21. When I was 5, my mom married my little brother's dad. She was working basically all the time, and also trying to balance out school. After she had my little brother, his dad started getting hostile towards me. For context, I was living with my mom, twin sister, little brother, stepbrother, stepsister, and stepfather. Now he's an ex-stepfather. His daughter was awesome. His son was a completely different story. So my ex-stepfather abused me just about every day for 2 years. I didn't know what to think about it because I was so young. He used to beat me with his belt, lock me in the attic, make me drink beer. He left me in the woods. But he was smart enough to hit me where the marks wouldn't be seen by my mom. He did give me a black eye once by punching me in the face. He always screamed at me. He scared me. Every time his kids did something wrong, he blamed me for it and he beat me for it. I hate him. And every time I go down to my bio-dad's house, I'm scared I'll see him again. I'm scared he will try to do it again. His son, who was around 10, 12 at the time, used to groom me. He and I shared a room and he made me touch him at night. And every time I said I don't want to, he'd break something or say I hit him or lock me in the closet. All of those getting me beaten by his dad. I'm 16 now and I'm still trying to get over it. I'm hurting. I wish I could go back and change it. I had my childhood stripped away from me because my mom had bad taste in men, and that's unforgivable. She doesn't believe the scars he left. She negates what I say and feel, just so that she can feel better about herself. I have panic attacks whenever I smell a certain type of alcohol now, and I have panic attacks whenever I smell weed. I'm claustrophobic too, and I hate being alone in the dark. Thank you for listening. I had to get it out there in a way that I'm comfortable with. Told her. My ex-stepdad abused me and his son groomed me, and my mom still doesn't care. Update. I've been going to therapy for a few weeks now. The only reason for that being I have PNEs. PTSD-related non-epileptic seizures. Basically, if I have a panic attack, it could cause a seizure. My therapy is TBCBT, or trauma-based cognitive behavioral therapy. The only reason my mother is allowing me to do this is because I almost died because of a seizure caused by my current stepfather because he hit me and held me in a headlock after screaming at me, and B, so that I could stop pissing her off by not wanting to be around her. Both my mother and current stepdad are abusive. I can't do anything about it. As a 16-year-old, I can't legally move out unless I get emancipated in the state of PA. Story 22. My dad forcing me to eat my pet squirrel. I grew up lonely in a rural area. I made friends with the squirrel, and the little guy got tame around me. Like I could sit in the bench swing, and he would climb down, and I would pass him a granola bar. He actually begged with his hands, asking for the food. Well, one day, my dad was cooking fish and drinking beer with his friends. Well, they see me in the bench drawing, and the squirrel comes down. They shout, "What am I doing?" I said, "Just chilling with my little bud." I was 10M. They make a joke about my dad raising a Disney princess. He gets angry and goes inside. He comes back outside, and next thing I know is the bench I was in is being knocked over the squirrel bales, and then boom, little Bud is shot with birdshot. His friends were laughing till this. He then tells me to wait by the fryer. He proceeds to clean the squirrel and then deep fries it in front of me and makes me watch. I see the eyes of what was my friend exploding in the oil. He cooks it till it was done. He then in front of his friends demands that I eat it. I say no. But he grabbed me by the collar and pops me 3 times. He then tells me the squirrel got off easy. He could do a lot worse to me. I eat my friend that literally had just been feeding and laughing with 30 mins ago. His friends a lot lost their composure. Many left and a few threw up at this sight. It was not a good day. So, yeah, again, being made to eat a pet. Story 23. Nearly almost certainly died in a parasailing accident when I was young. Was up there with my mom. There was others out doing the same thing and our ropes nearly got tangled. I vividly remember my mom panicking before being a total badass and steering us out of a disaster. Story 24. When I was about 6 years old, I was at Dairy Queen with my mom and brothers. Mom needed to change the baby's diaper, so she asked this guy sitting at a table near us on the patio to watch my 4-year-old bro and I. She had seen him around before and thought of him as a friendly neighbor. A few weeks later, he was on the news. I imagine he must have been smirking and thinking, "Jesus, lady, you're lucky they're a bit young for my taste." Story 25. I, 15 at the time, was traveling in a foreign country with my sister. 26. We stayed at a local hotel. My period came and I got a little bit on the sheets the first night. Housekeeping came and cleaned as usual. Nothing mentioned. A few days passed, and when we were checking out, they asked to see our passports again. I guess we thought they just needed to double-check their guest registry to update it. Once the passports were in his hand, the front desk person, male, got really angry with us and began yelling at us for making mess in the hotel. At first, we had no idea what he was talking about because we are very tidy travelers. He just kept yelling that we made trouble for him. He then proceeded to ask housekeeping to bring out the evidence. And guess what? They proceeded to bring out the unwashed sheets. The WTF? No idea where they had stored it. A nice young Australian couple witnessed the whole thing. The lady muttered, "It's just a few spots. Can't you just wash it?" He yelled at them to stay out of it, and they fell silent. He even asked who made the mess. My sister said she did. 15-year-old me felt like I had done something criminally wrong. My sister paid him for the sheets and got our passports back so we could leave. Story 26. I got bitten by a penguin on my neck. No, I wasn't doing anything stupid at the time. The penguin was standing on a table for photo ops as an animal ambassador for a zoo, and it went for my wine glass as I stood next to it, moved my wine glass out of the way, and got nipped on my neck for my troubles. Story 27. I have a tech company, and we are not in the best financial situation. We had a very big contract awaiting signature. Well, it won't get signed because the person responsible for the project was one of the 5 casualties from the Titan submarine. Story 28. I won an art competition with my painting judged while hanging upside down. When I told them, they tried telling me I was wrong till they realized I had painted it. TBH, it was a school competition. Story 29. I was born in the early 80s, and during that time they took newborns away to the nursery to be cared for away from the parents. When it was time for my mother to leave the hospital, they returned her baby to her. And before my parents left, they needed to change the baby's diaper. Well, when they removed the diaper, they saw that the baby that they had was a girl when my mother had given birth to a boy. The hospital tracked down the parents who had me and got the babies back to their rightful parents. Some crazy crap. Story 30. My epidural failed during the emergency C-section. I likely had listeria, my temp was 103 plus, and then the monitor for baby's heartbeat went quiet type emergency. I had the epidural in place for a while before when we thought puzzle birth was still an option. No one in the OR believed me when I started telling them, then yelling at them that I was numb anymore. It happened after they had gotten through all of the parts of me to get to baby. So I asked my husband if baby was out. He said yes, and the tiny control I had left departed, and I was screaming at everyone that I could ducking, feel them and their metal paddles in my body. Burned by my head reassured me it was just pressure, so my dumb self decided I was going to GTFO. I planted my feet on the table and tried to lift myself to scoot away from the PPL, who in my mind were now torturing me. Husband says it looked like a seance or a magic trick where the person covered by a sheet levitates off the table bed. I made a huge mess too, since I did it kind of fast. Sent a bowl full of bloody gauze flying up to hit the ground. Tools clattered. I remember the poor anesthetist got yelled at while trying to give me propofol, then lights out finally. Story 31. Was in a relatively mild car accident. MS recommended x-rays just to be safe. I argued a bit, but ended up relenting. X-rays lead to a CT and a kidney cancer diagnosis. Doctor said I would have been dead inside a year if it hadn't been found. Story 32. I was almost in a shooting at a Target. Was with my mom and dad about to go shopping for Christmas gifts. I think for my sister, she was at gymnastics when this happened. My parents park the car, and as we get out, this guy lighting a cigarette stops us and says, "Hey, there's 2 people over there with guns drawn. I would get back in your car and shop somewhere else." We left, got dinner, and saw lots of emergency vehicles that night. The next morning, there was an article about the parking lot shooting at the Target we were at. I can't remember, but a few people died. When this happened, I was sad I couldn't go to Target, but now that I really understand the situation, I feel so bad for the people and families who are affected by it. I can try and find the article of the event if anyone is interested in reading about it. I'm hoping the guy who warned us that there was guns is doing okay and living a great life, and I hope the families affected are doing well. And I'm hoping they know how much this even that injured or took away a loved one of theirs is still something pulls at the heart of others. Story 33. You know those big fun slides you ride down on the rug? Carpet thing? When I was 8, the worker giving the push accidentally stood on my carpet and I went flying down all 3 parts and bumps of the slide on my back and arms. Ended up blistering and bubbling all over my hands and arms. Worst skin burns of my life and almost passed out. Next day on boardwalk, seagull crapped on my head. Story 34. I was abused for several months by a guy who worked at a local primary school. He did it to many others and had multiple prior accusations that never resulted in conviction. And also unknowingly having phimosis at the time, my foreskin didn't retract. I got surgery for it much later in life. I incorrectly identified him as being circumcised because his foreskin retracted when he was erect. I literally didn't know that could happen without circumcision. This single bit of evidence was used to make an argument that I lied about all of the events. Keep in mind, providing concrete evidence for these things is extremely difficult, often impossible. My case fell through, and as a result, so did 2 others that hinged on mine. So basically, he got to walk free because I didn't know enough about circumcision. I'm 30 now and finally getting therapy for PTSD. Story 35. I asked out a waitress at a place I used to go to for lunch every week. She invited me over, which I thought was a pit stop to another date location. It wasn't. When I walked in, her dad was there, already weird, with a lady on his lap that my date didn't know. My date seemed unfazed though, so I got the feeling this wasn't abnormal for her. He shook my hand and I noticed that their kitchen table was covered end to end with weed. Weed doesn't typically make me uncomfortable, but this was a ton of weed. It was illegal where I was at the time, and it looked like an amount that somebody would actually get busted pretty bad for. She says, "We're going to my room," and I'm thinking, we are. But also I don't want to stay with her dad and the lady of the night, so I go with the flow. She only has a bed in her room, so I sit down and we start talking. I ask her what she does around the city, and she says nothing. She just drives around with her friends. I'm trying to get some more from her, and we start talking about her friends, at which point she says, "All of my friends are either in prison, on probation, or served their time." I nervously laugh, and she can sense I'm uncomfortable with that, so she gets on Facebook. She says, No, they're really great people, like this guy I've known for years. The picture is a guy maybe twice her age. He killed his wife, but he's a really great guy, and he'd do anything for me. Now I'm looking for the eject button on the date, so I try talking about religion to try to tank the date. She says she's a witch and that it's super peaceful, but she had to leave her last group because they started devil worshipping. She attempts to show me her spell book, and I'm thinking I'll just fake a text at this point. I know, not super creative, but I wanted to get out of there without getting axe murdered by her bestie. Before I can tell her, she says, "Wait here," and runs out of the room. When she comes back, she's only wearing an open kimono and a pair of panties. To give you some idea of where I thought the night was headed, I'm in Caucus and a polo at this point and stay that way throughout. I truly have no idea why she thought this date was going well. After she comes in, she starts panther crawling toward me on the bed, and I'm scooting back away from her all the way until I hit the bed frame. Then I, very gracefully, declare, "Oh no, my brother's car broke down and he needs me." She tries to get me to stay, and I deflect with 2 or 3 consecutive excuses before she gives up on that. She's wrapped her arms around my waist at this point, so I scooch toward the edge of the bed and pry her arms off of me like a toddler before leaving. So that was my weirdest date. Story 36. I got stranded at 180,000 feet on a 20,000 plus mountain due to weather. Nobody except the person with me knew where I was and had no emergency beacon or communication device. No other people on the mountain. Had to wait it out until next morning to hike back down to safety. That's the short story. Do not recommend. Story 37. I was lying on the beach in the sand when I heard a soft thud next to me. I sat up and saw a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich lying next to me in the sand. Wondering where it came from, I looked up and saw, to my surprise and horror, a flock of seagulls descending upon me and the sandwich one of them had just dropped. It was a mad frenzy of them fighting me and each other for the sandwich and me fighting them to get away. The whole thing was over in 5 seconds. Story 38. I won a bicycle out of honeycomb cereal when I was a kid. My dad's response when I showed him the little piece of paper with the word karate on it. You little crap. Handlebars broke off while I was in the air on a jump, wiped out when I landed. But luckily no scars. I woke up once when I was a kid, went into the bathroom and had an alligator in there. No, it wasn't Florida. My dad had got a couple caimans the day before and one got out. He was, for a while, a herpetologist. And we traveled around Texas fairs with a 40D logging trailer filled with snakes and lizards. He was outside dressed like Steve Irwin. This was years before the legendary Mr. Irwin, getting people to go inside while I gave tours. Fun stuff. I also had to help pull a 23 reticulated python off him at one point, and help him recapture an 18 king cobra we had. I guess most of the cool stories in my life revolve around my dad, who was just an epic man, who did everything every little kid wants to be when they grow up, and died a broken man due to alcohol and lost love. Story 39. I'm Irish. When I was a teenager, me and my friends would sneak into our local soccer team stadium every Friday night instead of paying. The soccer stadium was next to a pitch and putt course and the local city dump. Glamorous, I know. Sneaking into the soccer stadium involved firstly sneaking into the pitch and putt course. This was no big deal, because at night there was no security, and it only had a waist-high wooden fence protecting it. Once on the course, we would run to the 18th hole. There we would encounter a 10-feet metal fence surrounding the soccer stadium to our south and a narrow river between, shallow and easily crossed, behind us and the dump to our north. This was the best point to enter, as it was the furthest point away from the stand and floodlights of the stadium, and harder for security to see us who were often patrolling the fence. At this point, I would give the other kids a leg up onto the fence so they could scale and jump in. I did this as I was one of the older members of the group, and therefore taller plus could scale the fence unassisted. This area was pretty dark, but on this night there was a full moon, so a bit more light. So I was assisting the last kid over when I had this sense something was behind me, so I turned my head towards the dump. The whole dump was elevated upon a mound of land about 15 feet high, so I was looking up, and there it was as clear as day. A lion. I'll never forget it. He was just standing up there looking at me with a glorious full moon behind him. I couldn't believe my eyes. There are no lions in Ireland. How is this possible? I called for my friends, but they had gone. We both stood there just for a few seconds staring at each other when I realized he could bound down the hill at me and rip me to shreds. So I scaled the fence, and we never saw each other again. Nonetheless, after I told my friends of this event, none of them believed me. A lion? Would you ever duck off? The slagging went on for years. I was called the Lion King often, but I could never shake this sight and experience. As the years went by, I wonder had I imagined the whole thing. Then many years later, I was at a session and some random guy was telling stories. He had a few interesting ones as he and his cousin had literally run away with the circus after it came to town one day and did a bit of traveling. He proceeds to tell the story of when he was in my town and how there was a big panic amongst the circus staff as a lion had escaped and fled to the city dump when they were trying to put it back in its cage. Story 40. I got made redundant from an extremely busy job where I was desperately needed, and moved into a non-existent job in another department. I spent around 3 weeks doing absolutely nothing on a daily basis and had zero work to do, ever. I would fill my days by walking around the building talking to people, sitting for hours on end in the staff canteen looking at other jobs and sitting in my car, before eventually getting myself fired on purpose so I could escape it. Story 41. When I was 9, I tripped over a log playing tag in the dark and fell into the middle of a small bonfire we had gone in the yard after Grandma's funeral. I had both my knees and hands directly in the coals, and it took me a few seconds to realize where I had fallen, felt a sharp pain in one of my hands and got up and walked out. Only my left hand got burnt black. The rest of me was totally fine. Healed up good. Now I just have a tiny scar with a little black dot embedded in it. Luckily, my nerves were seared, so it wasn't even very painful. And the subsequent blisters that covered my hand after all the black was STD off just kept reforming until the skin healed. We were poor, so my parents didn't take me to the doctor or even bandage it or nothing, so it was a small miracle. It healed so well. Story 42. that on Valentine's Day 2008, my boyfriend cheated on me, but I couldn't confirm it. 2 days later, on the 16th, I came home and he was high AF. Long story short, I caught him in a lie and he admitted to cheating on me. We had been together for 4 years. The next day, on the 17th, his dad was over our house. We lived together, building a fire pit. We rented a house from his dad and his dad was fixing it up, trying to flip it for a quick profit. I was inside packing my crap because, he got caught, admitted to cheating on me, and I was out. While packing, someone gets sex on the bedroom window. I ignored it. Some friends had spent the night, so I thought they were all in the backyard goofing around. A few minutes later, another knock, and then pounding. I walk through the house to the back door to say to them to stop banging on the door, and I see my boyfriend / soon-to-be ex-boyfriend on the phone, pacing, screaming, "Dad!" I look at his dad, and he laid out on the floor, snoring and unconscious, and the people who had stayed over are just standing there in shock. I ask what happened, and he said his dad was sweating a lot, sat down, his arms locked up straight out in front of him, and then he fell back. I monitored him closely, waiting for the ambulance. Then he stopped breathing. I ended up doing CPR on him for over 10 minutes, which was literally exhausting. It was working for a while, but then, before the ambulance got there, he exhaled into my mouth, and I just remember tasting cigarettes, and then he went really limp. His eyes were still open, but there was no life behind them. I kept doing CPR because everyone else was there watching, and I didn't want to be the one to announce what I knew had just happened. The ambulance finally arrived. They did the shock paddles on him several times. Nothing. He was pronounced DOA at the hospital, and I did not leave my ex that day. Stayed 3 more years. Wish I hadn't. But how do you dump someone the day their dad has a heart attack and dies right in front of them? Story 43. My late grandfather was convinced that he was the Christian Messiah and that it was his God-given mission to destroy the Antichrist. He lived with me and my family for about 7 or so years when I was a child. He believed that I was the child of Satan himself and therefore the Antichrist. He spent years methodically torturing me to weaken my mortal vessel so that he could destroy me and send my soul back to hell. Almost every single day, he would beat me. Tell me how much God and the whole world hates me. Tell me all about the prophecy and his mission to destroy me. How much I deserve to die and rot in hell. I don't know how I survived or why he didn't finish. My memory has mostly blocked it out, but I think that was when he really decided to play the long game. I was forcefully deprived of food, sleep, and basic hygiene. By the time I was 11, I was pissing and crapping myself every single day because I wasn't allowed to use the bathroom. If I was caught, I was beaten. I would go months without showering. My body was so deprived of its necessities that it could barely function on its own. My fingernails were like notebook paper. My hair was falling out. You could see my bones protruding through my skin. I could barely think straight, would spend most of the day in a daze. I would get severely sick for sometimes months at a time. My immune system was so useless that I could have the flu, bronchitis, pneumonia with hardly any fever at all. The rest of my family knew about this and did almost nothing about it. Allowed me to eat every now and then. Took me to the family clinic for meds and steroids every few months. The bare minimum to just barely keep me alive. I had fully accepted that I wasn't going to make it. I knew I didn't have long to live. I was dying, going closer to the end every day. And it was only a matter of time before my grandfather would receive the order to try and finish me off again. Then when I was 13, he got kicked out after calling the cops on my stepdad, accusing him of stealing a pair of jeans. An officer came to our house. She was an old co-worker of my mom. The whole ordeal wounded her pride and made her fearful that the family secrets would be exposed, and that she would face the repercussions of doing nothing to stop him, and even taking part in his abuse. So she kicked him out. He died a year later from being tortured and starved by his brother. Story 44. I wrecked my bike in the summer after 7th grade and had to be mercy flighted, broken bones, quite severe concussion. I forgot 90% of 7th grade and struggled in 8th, but a weird side effect was that I could music. Before I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, couldn't hear when notes were the same or different, completely tone deaf, and after the accident I could. I sang in my college choir for 4 years. Story 45. I got 3rd-degree burns from French fries as a baby. They got dropped on my arm and my dumb baby brain panicked and pancaked them to my upper arm. Story 46. I drowned twice as a child and had to be revived and hospitalized. My distracted father was with me both times. Almost drowned a 3rd time with my father nearby, but my older brother saved me. Story 47. My grandfather has been married to 3 women in my lifetime. 1, my dad's mom, to whom he was married when I was born and divorced when I was a year old, so he could get with #22. My step-grandmother, who he married immediately after the divorce from #1 and who I've considered one of my grandmothers my whole life. He divorced her when she was diagnosed with schizophrenia around the time I was in my early 20s. 3. His current wife, who he married when I was in my early 30s and who I've never met and have 0 plans to. Here's where the unbelievable but true part comes in. Each of these women have a photograph of themselves holding me as an infant in the hospital when I was born. 1 makes sense. 2 is a bit tacky. He wasn't divorced yet, so I'm not sure what the vibe was. 3, though. None of us know why or when she was there. We didn't even learn about this woman's existence until they married 30-plus years after the picture in question was taken. I was a very distinct-looking baby, thanks to being severely post-term. Born more than 2 weeks past my due date, so the photos are easy to verify. I've been no contact with him for almost 20 years for many reasons, including this one. He's a ducking piece of work. Grandpa's brought his wife and all his side pieces to the hospital when I was born, and there's photo evidence. Story 48. Had routine stomach surgery in 2015. Thankfully ended up being keyhole, so minimal scarring, drama, and the view that I'd be home in 2 days max. 2 days later, still in hospital, I wasn't well. Tachycardia, temperature, swelling, etc. But got up that morning, had a shower, and got dressed as the nurses said it was normal after some surgery to be a little off. Ma'am had tried telling them, she's a RN and midwife, that she thought I may have an infection. She was accused of being neurotic. Later that day, started to drift in and out of consciousness whilst they eventually did an emergency CT scan. Turns out the surgeon had nicked my bowel. I had a 2 centimeters rip in it and was dying from sepsis. Parents were told to say goodbye to me as staff physically ran me through the hospital in my bed and straight back into theater. I'm talking medical drama style. Nurse had hold of my hand and ran next to the bed, telling me she'd better see me at the other side. They had to fully open me up. Ended up with an 8-inch scar down my stomach, a 3-liter washout, and 2.5 weeks in hospital whilst I fought against septic shock plus. Told me that as I already had PCOS and now I have huge internal scarring, that the predicted infertility was pretty much a 99% certainty now. And if by some miracle I fell pregnant, I'd lose the baby B unable to carry to term. Aside from some scarring on my bowel, which can be painful occasionally, and the scar down my stomach, I'm tip-top now. And I conceived twin girls naturally 4 years later, survived sepsis, had children, and I'm now happier than ever. Story 49. I was visiting London with my grandpa, and we were riding in a small public bus. And on this bus, there happened to be a dwarf. A young schoolgirl, probably because her mother told her to, approached her and offered up her seat to the woman, but she rudely yelled, "What? Because I'm a dwarf! I've been a dwarf my whole, and I've managed just fine without any help." And the poor girl sat down all red in the face. But a while later, at another stop, a woman stood up, and before exiting, she tapped the dwarf on the shoulder and said, "I'll be getting off now. My seat's empty if you'd like to take it." But just as she started to carry on, the woman cut her off and yelled, "No! Not because you're a dwarf, because you're a human being deserving of respect. And I must say you were very rude to that poor girl when she was just trying to be nice. And I hope that when you're getting ready for bed tonight, Snow White kicks in your door and kicks your ducking ass." Then she got off, leaving the dwarf standing there wide-eyed and slack-jawed, while the rest of us were sat there just looking at one another. Story 50. When I was 17 years old, my dad had incurable disease and was getting radiation treatment from Sloan Kettering in New York City. We live in Georgia, so the radiation treatment required my mom and dad to fly to New York City every single Tuesday and fly back home on Thursdays. Basically my entire junior year of high school. While I was home alone one week, a man broke into our house and knocked over a bookshelf in the basement that woke me up. I grabbed my baseball bat that I would sleep with and slowly and quietly made my way down to the basement. As soon as I got into the basement and turned the light on, I saw the man holding our TV. He immediately dropped it and came running at me, and I took one swing at his torso. However, he ducked, and the bat ended up hitting him right in the temple, and he fell straight to the floor unconscious. Thinking he was the only man who broke in, I ran all the way back up to my room to get my phone and call the cops. By the time I got back down the stairs, the man was gone. After hanging up with the police, I looked at our security cameras on my phone and found a different man running away while carrying the man that I had hit in his arms. The police arrived, and I showed them the security footage, and then they eventually left. My parents decided to come home immediately the next day because of the break-in, but my dad was also feeling way worse than normal, so the doctor decided to not do the radiation that week. That same day that my parents got back home, my mom ended up having to call an ambulance for my dad. We ended up finding out that the doctor had accidentally hit his stomach with the radiation from one of his recent treatments. About 2 days later, while still in the hospital, I got up to find the cafeteria, and as I glance into an open room walking down the hallway, I see the man that I had hit with the baseball bat sitting in a hospital bed. I walked back and forth nonchalantly to really make sure it was him. I went and told my parents, and they told the nurses, and the police showed up and decided to give him one more day under medical care before they ended up arresting him. Story 51. I was once on a date, and he got up to go to the toilet. After 10 minutes, I started to worry if he had left, so I sent him a text, and he replied asking me to come to the toilet. I found it strange, but decided to go to the toilet. When I went in, I was hit with a smell that I had never experienced. He then told me that he had food poisoning and he had shit his pants and been sick all over himself. This was only our second date. I then had to ring his mother, and she had to come and drop off some new pants for him and had to take him home. We had already ordered food, so I had to pay because he had to leave. He never rang me back after that. Story 52. I shat my pants in a carnival ride. The bullet, whilst wearing cargo shorts and diarrhea, was slung out of the leg of my shorts and rained down on the unsuspecting patrons below, shut down the entire area. Nobody got funnel cakes. My dad made me ride in the back of the truck home without bottoms on, and I don't like wearing undies. Edit. To add more context, I was 14 at the time and was raised in rural Alabama. The carnival coming to town was a whole citywide ordeal in my Wanna high school. Less than 50 in my graduating class for reference. I was the crap slinger for years, and some people in my friend group still bring it up. I'm 31 now. Similar crafty situation while hunting and wearing coveralls while leaning back against a tree in the invisible chair position doing my business. It partially landed in my coverall bib on the back and smeared up my back as I put them on. Had to ride in the back in 20-degree weather. Not fun either. Story 53. My mom found out my dad filed for divorce 5 minutes before my birthday dinner started when I was turning 18. Mans waited last second because he didn't want to pay child support. My mom was cooking my birthday dinner, and I was down the road at a friend's house celebrating before I went home. Mom went to get the mail and found a letter from an attorney saying he found out my dad filed and wanted to be her lawyer. Mom peeled down the block in the minivan and pulled over to the side of the road where my friends and I were outside and announced it to me. Dad came home 5 minutes later to just me and no mom. He was like, "Hey, time to celebrate," with a bunch of presents and stuff. It was so awkward. Story 54. I learned that my father was not a good man at a very early age. For context, my oldest brother was literally a genius. He graduated high school before he turned 13. He got his bachelor's degree before getting his driver's license, and his 18th birthday was spent doing paperwork for a graduate program. My father was so proud of him at every step, with every accomplishment, and he expected similar greatness from the rest of his kids. My childhood was spent with him forcing wildly complicated things onto me so I could discover my genius. Everything from technical manuals and medical textbooks to musical instruments and giant books like War and Peace were things I was made to try and get through. I did great for a little kid, but not for a genius. I managed. My sister wasn't so lucky. She struggled a lot with what she was given, but most 3-year-olds would, since it's rare for a 3-year-old to be able to do math, let alone count to 10. But that was what my father expected. He ended up losing his crap. And because she forgot what was after the letter E, I tried to speak up and he screamed at me to let her do it on her own. He got so angry he threw her against the wall. I was frozen in fear as he hit my little sister over and over again. He stopped when my mother started coming upstairs, but when she took both of us out of the room, she knew what was being done. I still remember the look on her face. I wish with every fiber of my being it was a lie. I wish my sister could live a normal life. I wish I wasn't compelled to think about this every time I see a father and daughter together out in the world. I wish it wasn't true, but it is. Story 55. Last year in August, my 99-year-old grandmother fell and broke her leg. She went to the hospital and shortly after to a nursing home to rehab. While there was a COVID outbreak. She ended up passing COVID onto my mother and my aunt in late October. Around the same time, my brother was having stomach issues and ended up in the ER and then the hospital for a few days for liver issues. He was close to needing a full transplant, but luckily ended up okay. At the same time, my mother's COVID landed her in the hospital due to some absolutely terrible headaches she was having. The doctors quickly determined she had fluid around her brain and kept her there for a few days to run tests. The day my mom left the hospital, November 3rd, my grandma passed away only about 20 minutes before my mom arrived to her house to say goodbye. 1 week later, some results came back from my mom's testing showing that her disease was in its 4th stage. Further testing showed she also has major problems with the rest of her organs. Her brother, my uncle, had Lewy body dementia at the time, and he passed away just days after her first chemo treatment on December 23rd. The stress of all of this unfortunately got to my other uncle, their brother, who had a heart attack and passed away on January 10th. Just before he passed away, my mom ended up in the hospital due to some clotting in her legs. She spent nearly 3 weeks there, slowly losing her ability to think, understand, and communicate before passing away on January 22nd, 2023. When I tell people this story, I always have to preface it saying if it happened in a movie, I'd say it was too unrealistic because even though it happened to me, it still seems like it's too wild to be real. Almost the entire family was wiped away in the span of 2.5 months. Story 56. I was sitting on a sidewalk, heard some little pop noises like a squirrel was dropping nuts from a tree or something. Then a huge tree branch fell on top of my friends and me. I was basically stuck under it. My friends were able to get out and had to lift it off of me. Story 57. My girlfriend of 4 years, whom I was living with at the time, got a call from her brother that his youngest daughter and son had been kidnapped, and his oldest son, his ex-wife, and her boyfriend has been killed in their home, and no one knew where the kids were at. It became national news, and even Geraldo Rivera got involved. He actually came out and spent time with the family and took everyone to dinner several times. They couldn't find the missing children or the murderer, and her brother was now the prime suspect as he had no alibi and was called in several times to take lie detector tests. Almost 7 weeks later, a waitress at a Denny's in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, noticed a little girl who looked a lot like my GF's niece with a man, and she was acting a little strange. She recognized the little girl and stalled the guy until police showed up and arrested him. His youngest son, unfortunately, did not survive. Now might be a good time to mention that my GF at the time was the sister of Steve Groan, and his daughter is Shasta Groan, who was abducted by Joseph E. Duncan III. As a bit of a side note, Duncan had been arrested in Minnesota for inappropriately touching 2 children on a playground, but an acquaintance got him out on bail, where he immediately skipped town and drove to Idaho and kidnapped Steve Groan's children. Steve contracted lung disease during all this and died in 2019. Joseph E. Duncan died in prison in 2021. It's just about the worst kind of true story one can have, and I wish it wasn't true at all. Story 58. 3.5 years ago, I had 3 guys try to rob me. I was very fit then and had trained in jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. In the end, I put 2 of them in the hospital and all 3 were arrested. I walked away with really bad bruises and cuts, a concussion, and possible broken ribs. During the fight, I got hit with a crowbar. Well, when I went to have my ribs scanned, they ended up finding cancer. Stage 4 of an extremely rare cancer that only about 80 people have. I never had any symptoms, and my blood work was excellent. Doctors said I had about 1.5 years to live, but I'm still going. Story 59. I was in a weird love triangle. This was back in like 2007. I was into a girl, but her near inseparable best friend was into me. I wanted to go out with the girl, but she felt weird going out with me while her best friend kept talking about me and said I should go out with the best friend first and let her get me out of her system. So I did that. It went okay, but no chemistry. Went out with the first girl and there was major chemistry, but still withholding. It became more and more where it was always the 2 of them coming on outings with me and sometimes ditching me until the day they told me they both decided to date each other. Story 60. A friend, Joe, introduced me to his best friend, Matt, back in high school. I married his friend, Matt. Matt died less than a year after we married. 5 years later, I'm married to the original friend, Joe, and pregnant with our first. Edit for clarification. Story 61. Many years ago, I was walking my pug early in the morning. Sun wasn't quite up yet. I was walking him along a main road. Across the busy road was a junkyard with Roddies in it guarding it. All of a sudden, I hear heavy breathing and look, and a Roddie got loose somehow and was full on galloping toward us across the busy road. Just as I was going into, I'm protecting my pug, I'm taking this hit mode, a car comes along and full force hits the dog, maybe 40 miles per hour because the driver most likely didn't see him since it was mostly dark out still. The dog flew 3/4 of the way down the block. Cops came. Driver stopped. Dog wasn't dead, but I'm assuming it died eventually. It's such a wild story to me when I'm telling people, but I'm so thankful that car accidentally stopped us from being attacked. Story 62. My father passed away when he and my mother were visiting another country. There was a national holiday going on in that country, so we could not transport his body back to the US for another week. For that same holiday reason, my mother could not book a trip back home in country. I had to make the plans from the US. This was before the internet, so I had to go to the airport and make the arrangements in person, since it involved multiple airlines and special circumstances, and the US Embassy helped. I had his death certificate faxed to me, and it was all in a language I couldn't understand. Story 63. When I was young, I swallowed a game token and it got lodged in my throat. Thankfully, just before it got stuck, I let out a muffled scream. My dad was downstairs watching TV. He heard the scream and came running upstairs. He found me choking and attempted the Heimlich maneuver. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So he picked me up and rushed me into the bathroom, lifted me upside down, and my stepmom began hitting me on the back while she was calling 911. I swear it felt like forever, but the token came out and fell in the toilet. I'm sure they must have been shocked to see what I had been choking on this whole time. If it hadn't been for my dad's superhuman hearing and quick thinking, I don't know if I would still be here now. Story 64. Right after my tonsils taken out, a couple days later, I notice I'm swallowing a lot more than normal. Go to the bathroom and just start spitting blood, and not like little drops. I mean, I help my mouth open over the sink, and it was just a constant stream. Went to urgent care, coughed up a blood clot about the size of a baseball, blood in my stomach. The scabs from surgery opened, so now I'm terrified of eating or drinking red foods that would show up when I spit or such. I'm not normally queasy about blood, but I think the fact it was my own and it was a lot was concerning. Story 65. I was sitting outside on my friend's patio, gazing up at the stars. My friend says, "You know, I've never seen a shooting star before." Almost immediately, a shooting star gleams across the sky as if she commanded it to happen. Is this reality WTF? Story 66. Someone tried to undertake me, and I didn't see them. So I merged into the lane, and they nearly hit me, but didn't. Anyway, I was in my little Nissan Micra, and this absolute lunatic in a 4x4 proceeded to try and run me off the road for the next 40 minutes. I had low petrol, and I was so scared. I was only 21 at the time. This psycho kept overtaking me, slowing down, speeding off, parking up, rinse, and repeat. Got to the top of a hill, and they'd stopped with the car blocking my lane. I went around them into the other lane and kept driving toward town, and they turned off, and I thankfully never saw them again. I was scared for a few weeks after going to the petrol station, but thankfully never saw him again. Remember my brother saying I'd made it all up when I told him. Story 67. Had 3 cops circle me who could tell I was high. They told me girls like me get abused around these parts and closed in. I panicked and ran 2 blocks back to the place I was staying and freaked the duck out. I don't trust cops at all because of it. Story 68. My sister almost got arrested at the White House because she sat down in the line outside to get in. She only did that because her feet hurt. Apparently, it's illegal to sit down at the White House because it's considered a sit-in protest. She was 12. Story 69. When I was around 11 or 12, I woke up in the middle of the night with a pretty strong pain in my head, but got back to sleep pretty quickly afterwards. When I got up that morning, I had dried blood on my hand, where I felt my head, and a big cut across my forehead and eyebrow. Didn't own any cats at the time. If it happened now, my cat would defo be the prime suspect. Didn't have any random posters over my bed. I really can't think of any logical cause. Spooked me out pretty badly, but nothing unexplainable or scary has ever happened since. Story 70. One time my wife and I went to dinner at any more upscale restaurant. When we were standing in the door waiting to be seated, a fairly well-dressed woman was leaving with her 2 young children. The little boy goes to reach up to the podium and grab some mints on his way out, and the mother slaps his hand away and says, "Tristan, don't take those. They're for the asterisk, poor people asterisk." And as she said the words poor people, she sort of looked in our direction. My wife actually burst out laughing in front of her as she walked away in a huff. It's not big or anything, but I've been called a liar for telling that story before. In fact, I've been told a lot on Reddit that my stories sound fake. I take it as a compliment. Story 71. First day at my university accommodation, think college dorm for the Yanks. I noticed a stain on the ceiling. I reported it to building services, and they said they'd check it out in the morning. That night, the dead possum that had been up there deliquescing for who knows how long fell onto my bed, woke up with the thump, screeched in a way not really in character for my 186 centimeters, 95 kilograms, 6, 1 inch, 210 pounds, ass, and woke up everyone else on the same floor. They were nice enough to move me to a new room that very night, and the next day one of the mental health counselors asked me if I needed to talk about it. This being my first year of uni, I drank away the pain. Story 72. I had an allergic reaction to either the anesthesia or the mesh hernia repair, but my lower body broke out into this crazy rash. It looked like someone had dropped me in acid up to my belly button, but also on my hands up to my elbows. A perfect line where it ended, bottom half red as sunburn. The weirdest part is that when I put my arms down to rest at my side, the rash lined up. I went to multiple specialists, including a hematologist who ran every test they could think of. No answers. Crazy half-body rash lasted about 6 weeks, and the best answer I got was probably an allergic reaction, and to not have any elective surgeries in case it was the anesthesia. That was 8 years ago, and I still don't know WTF happened. Story 73. I grew up in Iowa. When I was 8 years old, my brother and sister, and 7 of our friends went sledding. We set up a couple banked corners part way down the hill to make it funner, and when we were ready, I was the first to go. My brother and a friend gave me a big push from the top, and when I hit the first bank turn, it acted more like a ramp than a bank. I flew for what felt like 100 feet and spent what felt like 5 minutes in the air. When I hit the ground, I landed on a barbed wire fence. All of my friends and my brother and sister stood there laughing at me, and nobody would help me. I had to pull it out myself. And that was the day I learned that there isn't anyone on this planet that I can count on. Story 74. Not me, but someone in my family. When I was young, we used to visit my family in a separate province. And one time they invited our extended family out. I hadn't met most of them, but my dad introduced me to Cousin Jay. He only had one arm, and I asked my dad privately what had happened. He was riding horseback in a storm on his farm to get his animals to safety. Lightning struck him, and his arm came clean off. His wife found him, and he lived. My dad asked him to show me the lightning scars. He was an awesome dude, and he loved to bake. He made cheesecake by himself for everyone that weekend, which I was honestly even more impressed by, because I can't even bake with 2 arms. Update. I asked my dad today how he survived being struck by lightning. He said his heart stopped when he got struck, and falling off the horse and hitting the ground restarted his heart. Even more badass. Story 75. A guy was staying at a hotel I was at. He pretended to be Homeland Security, fake badge, fake stickers on his BMW SUV, and left notes on his door saying, "I'm out on a mission, boss. I'll call you later." He also had a real doll girlfriend, and he would make out with her in the doorway of his room. Not only that, but he would have fake phone calls with her while walking around the hotel, upset that she was mad at him. The craziest part is that he had many guns that he would bring back into his room when coming back from a mission. I've told a few people this story, and either they think I'm exaggerating or just making it up, but nope, very real and scary. Story 76. I was traveling from Arizona to Colorado. I stopped just outside Shiprock, New Mexico on the Navajo reservation around 12 midnight. The plan was to get a couple hours sleep, then continue. At 1 a.m., I awoke from a horrible dream of screaming painted faces and bright colors of light coming at me from all directions. I quickly started the car and turned on the headlights. 10 feet in front of me was a coyote and a jackrabbit just sitting there looking at me. Many years later, I told this story to a Navajo girl I was dating, and she became visibly distressed and told me to never speak of it again. Story 77. I met a guy from my dream. It's sarcasm. When I was 13, I saw a dream about the world between life and death. In this dream, me and some unknown guy promised each other to meet in the next life. When I was 15, I met a guy who looked like the guy from that dream. He instantly approached me and told me that he saw me before. He told me that he had a dream about me, and it was exactly the same dream that I saw. I asked him about the details, what I was wearing, what was the surroundings, and it perfectly matched my dream. I don't believe in things like afterlife or fate, but it was a funny coincidence that his pickup line perfectly matched with the actual dream that I saw. Story 78. A guy I knew reasonably well at work, mild-mannered, self-deprecating, and just ordinary, killed his wife one day. No indication of any trouble whatsoever before that. Story 79. I became partially paralyzed from the waist down while sitting on the couch playing Zelda. My spinal cord became inflamed for no known reason. I didn't even know I could get a spinal injury without a fall, accident, or any trauma. I've been spending the summer learning how to walk again. Strange times. Story 80. I was getting physiotherapy for an accident in which I injured my knee due to a rather bad fall. I landed on with my full weight onto my right knee with all my weight. A few days before my second-to-last physiotherapy appointment, I went to a friend's bachelor party and wound up falling off an ATV onto my left knee with all my weight. My physiotherapist was a bit exasperated. I still have bad knees. Story 81. I grew up in Cuba, where it is mandatory for 18-year males to go to the army, unless you have a serious medical problem. And whilst in it, the flour that they were using to make bread was full of roaches. Such flour wasn't cleaned or anything before making the dough. And for that reason, the end result was the bread buns full of dead roaches inside. There was no other option. I had to eat the bread. Actually, I dare to say that the bread was the least contaminated food, keeping in mind you would see flies on the pre-cooked greenish meat and actual fungus on a ground meat crate. Story 82. I was a victim of abuse and kidnapping by my male best friend. He was older than me and liked me, but I didn't like him back. He kidnapped me, and I ended up giving birth to a girl. I called her Rose, to symbolize that there is beauty with all the thorns attached. Unfortunately, she ended up dying due to her heart stopping, and I eventually got safely back home. Story 83. Once when I was an infant, my mom put me down to sleep. Then she abruptly decided to wake me up and take me back to their room. Later that night, a drunk driver sailed straight down the hill above our house and plowed through a wall. My crib was just splinters. Story 84. It's not about me, but about my dad. When he was probably 11, he saw an empty steamroller and he drove it and knocked down an entire house just for funsies. Story 85. When I was about 6, I was crossing the road with my younger sister, and we both got hit by a double-decker bus. I got thrown about 20 feet, and she went under the bus and crawled out from the back. The only injuries we had were a small cut on the back of my head, and she had a small patch of road rash. Story 86. At my aunt's funeral, the priest accidentally called her the wrong name. It was very similar, like Kimmy instead of Kelly. My cousin, her daughter, was like 14 at the time and really struggling with losing her mom. So her dad gave her a sedative before the funeral. Because of the sedative, she wasn't exactly in control, and every time the priest said the wrong name, my cousin would laugh hysterically. It was like being in a sitcom, but it was awful because it was real. Story 87. 2 nights ago, I watched a large spider pull my window open so it could enter my room. It was open a tiny bit already, but it wedged itself in a gap and pushed it further open. I live in the UK. They don't do that here. Story 88. Got dentures at 28. I can chomp on popsicles like a rabbit eating a carrot lamau, no sensation. But man, getting your front teeth pulled out is like your nostrils being pulled inside out. Story 89. My high school gave me detention every day after school and sometimes on Saturdays because I was absent a fair amount due to severe migraines. Yeah, they effectively punished me for having blinding pain and vomiting. Story 90. All of my injuries. Hyperextended my knee playing mini golf. Broke my leg stepping off the bumper of a car that was barely moving, and got about 30 stitches when I was looking for lizards as a kid. Story 91. My dad's car ran over my big toe when I was like 10. I was guiding him into a parallel parking space in NYC and was standing too close to the car. The toe got ran over by one wheel and somehow didn't fracture. The nail bruised, though.